Let go of the struggle.
Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha, Gurureva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Chinmayam Vyapyat Sarvam, Trilokyam Sacharacharam, Tatpadam Darshitam Yena, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Tvameva Mata cha Pita, Tvameva Bandhuscha Sakha, Tvameva Vidya Dravinam, Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva, Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva. Jai Guru. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Marupena Sanstita, Namastasyai, Namastasyai, Namastasyai Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Shakti Rupena Sanstita, Namastasyai, Namastasyai, Namastasyai Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Buddhi Rupena Sanstitaha, Namastasyai, Namastasyai, Namastasyai Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Lakshmi Rupena Sanstitaha, Namastasyai, Namastasyai, Namastasyai Namo Namaha. So, Punit, will you be our chanter for the evening?
Sure, Jim.
All right, so I think we're starting the 5th chapter. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right, let's begin.
Panchamodhyaya, chapter 5. Evam satsangam ahatmyam shrutva tri sutabhashitam prahashtam manaso bhuyah prashtum evopachakrame. Thus, having heard the greatness of association with the wise, spoken by the son of Atri, Dattatreya, Parashurama, whose mind was delighted, began questioning him again.
So we're back to our framing story. So Dattatreya has explained the importance of satsang, sadhu sangha, association with the wise as the root cause of liberation. And so now Parashurama has more questions going on.
Satyam proktam idam natha bhavata shubhakaranam satsanga rupametacha pratyakshenaiva bhavitam. Lord, the cause of happiness has been explained by you. This is true. This characteristic of association with the wise has been experienced by me directly by my former association with Samvarta.
So we never know what contact with what sage starts us on the journey. Even though my teacher, Swami Chinmayananda, always talked about Swami Shivananda as his Diksha Guru. That's where he took sannyas in Rishikesh. And Swami Tapovanam as his Jnana Guru, the man from whom he studied the scriptures and attained knowledge. He also would talk about an incident that he had as a teenager, where he stopped by Arunachala, the ashram, and where Ramana Maharshi was there. And he was lying on the couch with his eyes shut. And of course, there were a whole lot of people. And there was no place to sit in the back. So he was compelled to have to go all the way up to the front. And he sat down. And as soon as he was seated, Bhagawan, his eyes opened and he looked right into the eyes of Balan, a young teenager. Tuned him up. He never said a word. And after some time, he closed his eyes again. And when the young Balan left, he didn't know what had happened to him. At that young age, he decided that Ramana Maharshi had hypnotized him and actually de-hypnotized him. But that grace bore fruit much later when he made his way to Rishikesh. So here we never know which contact with which great soul has made the difference. At the end of Vivekachudamani, Shankara says, oh, by the grace of some guru, I have rediscovered my self-nature. So here, even though Parashurama's contact with Samvarta was very brief, it awakened something in him. In many ways, this is what we call the deeper meaning of Shaktipat. Something got inside and began to do its work. Next verse.
Yo yatha sangamapnoti phalam tasya tatha bhavet striyopi himalekhayaha sangat sarve mahaphalah. Whoever obtains association in whatever manner, so would he have the consequence. All the residents of the city, even women, had the highest reward by the association of Hemalekha.
Yes, I think this is very funny because the wise person with whom people are associating with is a woman, but making fun of the patriarchal structures again. Even women are able to gain the highest knowledge. And this is a very important point. There are no limitations on who can gain the highest blessing. We have all sorts of wonderful stories. One of my favorites in Yoga Vasishta is the story of Karkati, who's a big fat demoness. She's a Rakshasi who becomes enlightened. So it's not limited to caste or gender or culture. If you have the mumukshutva, you have the burning desire for liberation and the punya to come in contact with a person of wisdom. Things can happen. Things can happen. Next one.
भूय इच्छाम्यहं श्रोतुं हेमचूडस्तया कथं बोधितस्य ममाचक्ष्व विस्तरेण दयानिधे. I wish to hear again as to how Hemachuda was instructed by her. Storehouse of compassion, tell me that indeed.
So here, the literary technique is, now let's go deeper into our story of Hemaleka and Hemachuda and the conversation between them. Going on.
एवं रामेण अनुयुक्तो दत्तात्रेय उवाचं तं शृणु भार्गव वक्ष्यामि कथां परमापवनीम्. Thus asked by Rama, Dattatreya said to him, Bhargava, I shall tell you the story which is most purifying. Listen.
Next one.
Evam tasya vacha shrutva Vishayan virasanvidam teshu sanjati nirvedo vimana iva sambhavau. Having thus heard the words of Hemalekha and regarding the objects of sense as insipid, Hemachuda, to whom disgust had arisen for them, became, as it were, disconsolate.
So, what has happened as the result of this conversation? Hemachuda has developed immature vairagya. He sees the stupidity, the vanity of the cravings that he formerly had for the world. He wants to let them go, and as we'll see in the next couple of verses, yet he's impelled by habit. The Christian saint, Saint Paul, in his letter to the Romans, frames it this way: I do not do that which I would do, and I do that which I hate. So we have this disconnect. There's a nobler part of us, and then another part of us. What do the kids say now? Acting out. And we feel this dissonance. And Paul says, therefore it is not I that do it, but sin that is lodged in my limbs. His vasanas, that's how he frames it. So going on, let's see how Hemachuda has his vairagya mature. Next verse.
Chirasthita Vishaya Javas. Chirasthita Vishaya Ja Vasananam Vasham Gataha Yaktum Va Sangrihitum Va Nashaka Ta Sahasahi Saha. Coming under the influence of desires or mental impressions born of objects of sense, existing for a long time, he was indeed unable either to abandon them forcibly or to grasp or accept them.
So here he is in that state where by the force of the past, and the word that the scripture's using is vasana. Vasati is the root. Help me out here, Puneet. I was taught it means to linger or to dwell overnight. Is that the way you were told the meaning of the root?
Yeah, I mean, it has a notion of smell to it, which just stays.
Yes, like a fragrance. Swamiji would oftentimes, where a woman has wearing a perfume, And she's in the room and she leaves the room, but the fragrance stays behind. So vasana is a subset of sanskara. Sanskara is an impression. Sanskaras in and of themselves are not necessarily problematic. Do you know this is a glass? The way you know it's a glass is you've been taught that it's a glass, which has left an impression in your mind. The fact that you know this is a glass does not cause you to suffer. But a subset of sanskara, the subset of that mental impression, is a vasana. So the definition is a vasana is an impression left in the unconscious as the result of previously performed egoistic actions. A vasana is an impression left in the unconscious as the result of previously performed egoistic actions. What do I mean by egoistic? It has the sense of I-ness and minus. And the result of that action delivers to the mind pleasure or suffering, and then the after the fact rumination over it, what we call chintya, makes me want to repeat that action or think I need to avoid that circumstance. Shankara uses the marvelous metaphor. Each one of these vasanas is like the thread of the silkworm. One thread, no big deal. Good strong worm, you can break it. But that's not what we do. There's thread after thread after vasana until we are cocooned. And that's actually what comprises my spiritual ignorance. It is the summation of my vasanas that comprise my spiritual ignorance. The great power of vasana is avarana shakti. How do I know my mind is under the throes or the influence of vasana? Because I have the non-apprehension of my self-nature. That's how I know vasana is operative. Shankara says, annihilation of the vasanas here and now is termed liberation by the wise. So, Hemachuda does not want to do drug, sex, and rock and roll, but he can't stop. So he has this cognitive dissonance. He can neither cease the activity because of the pressure of his vasanas, nor can he enjoy ignorantly, because Hemaleka has told him how vain and stupid it all is. Does this sound like a familiar mind state?
Yes.
In fact, I think we were kind of talking about this before class. So isn't it wonderful that they wrote a book about you and me 1,000 years ago?
Absolutely.
We're right on target. We're right where we're supposed to be.
Actually, Jim, I just wanted to comment. In Marathi, the word vas literally means smell. That's how it is colloquially used.
Yes, yes. 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 All right. So do you all understand the technical term vasana? Let me repeat it again. So it's emblazoned in your memory. A vasana is an impression that is left in the unconscious as the result of a previously performed egoistic action. The great power of a vasana is that it robs me of self-experience. When the mind is under the influence of vasana, I do not know who I am. That's the avarana shakti. And there's what we call vikshepa shakti, projecting power. Then I start to take the world as real, even if I intellectually know it's empty, that it's mithya. I still find myself acting out, doing the dance. So this is the state that Hemachuda is in. Next verse.
प्रियां न किञ्चित् प्रोवाच राजपुत्रोऽति लज्जितः काञ्चिच्च दिवसानेवम् अन्यचित् चिन्त्य याकुलः. The prince did not tell anything to his beloved, the prince did not tell anything to his beloved, being very much ashamed. Thus, he passed some days overcome by anxiety.
So what do we usually do? We have some sort of a moral inner waggy finger when we confront the fact that we're trying to renounce out of willpower, trying to be a goody-goody. And what usually happens when we're in that state, we may be able to control for a while, but then it comes out sideways. I'm going to lose 10 pounds before the first of the year. And then you sneak down to the kitchen at 2 o'clock in the morning and have a sweet. Shh, don't tell anybody. Or other behaviors. So that's our dear friend Hemachuda. He's just like you and I. So he's ashamed to talk to his wife about it. Of course she knows. So let's see what happens. Next verse.
विषयेषु प्रसक्तेषु स्मृत्वा तत् प्रिययोदितं विगर्ह नेव स्वात्मानं बुभुजे वासनावशः. When objects of sense were obtained, remembering what was uttered by his beloved and despising himself, he enjoyed them under the influence of mental impressions left by past experiences.
So when the opportunity to indulge comes about, he can't help himself. He go ahead and indulges, but he can't really freely enjoy anymore. There is no more uncomfortable state than a heart full of desires and a head full of Vedanta. Because you can neither give up the world right away, nor can you enjoy it the way an ignorant person can. It's a really uncomfortable place. Going on.
वासना वेगवशतो विषयान् नुगच्छति दृष्ट्वैव विषयान् दोषान् प्रिया प्रोक्तान् विचिन्तयन् शोकसंविघ्न हृदयो विषीदति मुहुर्मुहुरु एवं तस्या भवच्चित्तं चलद्धो लस्थितं यथा. Subject to the impulse of desires or mental impressions, he goes after the objects of sense. Merely on seeing the objects, thinking of the defects in the objects or the enjoyment thereof, narrated by his wife, he is de-spirited over and over again with his heart agitated by sorrow. Thus his mind became unsteady like one situated on a moving swing.
Muhur murhu, again and again. When we're in this state, one of the things that's obvious to us is how repetitive and mechanical and mindless these desires and actions are. We can get pretty disgusted with ourselves in this state. It's not a comfortable place. If you know anybody, for example, who has a problem with addiction or alcoholism or sex addicts, any of those addictive kinds of passions in the mind. Many of us who've been through that state, you know, it's not like you really are enjoying it. You just can't stop. It's not even fun anymore. Such is the nature of the addictive tendency of the mind. Now, what yoga would say is the human mind and ignorance, all of us who have that, we're addicts. There's just some addictions that are more socially appropriate than others. But one of the points the scripture is beginning to show us is that willpower as a way to overcome vasana doesn't work. Krishna says it very clearly in Gita. He says, the person who gets rid of all the objects of desire, but allows the desire to remain behind, is verily a hypocrite. But then he goes on to say, but his desire leaves him upon seeing the Supreme. This again is what we were talking about before class tonight. Here we says seeing the Supreme, meaning the yogi has that trick of being able to revel in his or her own self-nature, independent of the world. Next verse.
Bhojyam vastram bhushanam va yoshid vahanameva va mitrani vapi suhrido neshattam sukhayanti vai. Food, garment, ornament, women, vehicle, friends, or even affectionate ones do not make him happy even a little.
So here he is by habit indulging in all these things as a prince that he has available. And it's just habit, just repetition. But it brings him no pleasure like it did before. Because he understands the world. He sees it. He sees that it's only vasana. It's only the pressure of his mind. Now, when we try to sit in meditation and we're squirmy, we want to get up and do something. When we're restless, irritable and discontent. What we're feeling is vasana pressure. That's this impulse of the vasanas. First comes the restlessness. I want to fix this feeling in some way. Then the mind fixes on some particular object of desire. Then we go into action together, reinfecting the mind with more vasana, and that incredibly boring, repetitive cycle over and over and over again. Next verse.
नष्टाखिलार्थ इव स शोचत्येव निरन्तरं वासनाविवश सर्वं त्यक्तं नाशकदञ्जसा. Like one who has lost all his wealth, he grieves constantly. Helpless on account of acquired mental impressions, he was not able to abandon everything quickly.
So he's in this state of a foot in two worlds. He's begun to develop what I call immature vairagya, dispassion for the world, but the pressure of his vasanas, he's still impelled into this repetitive activity. And not a happy camper. Going on.
नोपभोक्तुं तथा शक्तो दोपदृष्टियुतस्ततः एवं तं शोकवशतो विवर्णवदनेक्षणं हेमलेखासमालक्ष्य कदाचित् सङ्गतारः किं नाथ पूर्ववत्तत्वं नो लक्ष्य से अन्त्यहर्षितः. So also he was not able to enjoy the objects of sense, being endowed with the notion of defects in such objects. Thereafter, Himalekha, who met him privately sometime, observing him thus with pale eyes and face on account of sorrow, said to him, Lord, why are you not seen to be extremely happy as before?
So she's been keeping an eye on him, as a good teacher would do. And she sees this turmoil and the fact that he can't enjoy ignorantly anymore. And so she asks him, why can't you enjoy like you did formerly? Let's see what he answers. Going on.
शोचन्तम् इव पश्यामि कुत एवं तव स्थितिः कच्चित् शारीर आत्मा ते नामये बाध्यते sada. I see you as if grieving. Whence is this state of yours? Is your bodily self undisturbed by disease always?
So here she asks him, are you despondent because you're sick? She knows that's not what it is, but she's just checking. Next one.
भोगेषु रोगभीतिं वै प्रवन् प्रवदन्ति मनीषिणः त्रिदोष सम्भवेद्देहे दोषवेषम्य सम्भवाः आमया प्रायश सर्व देहान् व्याप्य इव संस्थिता सर्वथा ह्यप्रतिकार्य वैषम्यं दोषजं ननु. Learned ones speak of the fear of diseases in enjoyments. When there is the arising of the derangement of the three humors of the body, diseases produced by the unevenness in the three humors generally exist pervading all bodies. The unevenness born in the three humors of the body is indeed irremediable altogether.
So here she's making a reference to the Ayurveda notion of how dosha or disease or defect arises in the body. So it's the how the humors get out of balance. You don't need to accept Ayurvedic medicine or anything like that. But the whole point here that she's getting at is, if you're sick, well, we can deal with that. There's no permanent freedom from physical affliction. It happens to bodies. That's what happens. Next one.
Ashanad vasanad vacho darshanad sparshanadapi kala kalada deshat karmatascha dosha vaishamya apnuyuhu. By reason of food, dwelling or clothing, speech, seeing, touching, time, place, and work, the disorder of the three humors may suffer unevenness.
So here there's again a brief understanding that the externals of the internal physical or external world material always affects the body. We can do our best to keep it healthy, but things happen. Bodies get sick. Going on.
Asta tasyoda bhavo loke sarvatha lakshatam gatah ityatra sati vaishamye chikitsa samprakirtita. Therefore, the origin of that unevenness has gone entirely unobserved in the world. Consequently, when there is unevenness of the disorders of the humors, medical treatment is prescribed.
Yes. So we don't really know what these causes are until they've affected us most of the time. And that's why we have medicines to deal with it. So we didn't know COVID was coming around the bend, but thank God now we have a vaccine. Hopefully, it will begin to alleviate the suffering. Going on.
Nukta chikitsa nupattato vaishamye kenachit kvachit tadvat priya kasmadhi shokasya tava sambhavaha. Medical treatment is not indicated anywhere by anybody when the unevenness of the disorders of the humors has not risen. Therefore, tell me, beloved, for what reason has your sorrow arisen?
So, if the cause of your suffering is mental, a pill will not fix it. And that runs contrary to how much of our modern Western society looks at stuff. I'm very grateful that we have things like antidepressant medication or things for bipolar disorder or treating schizophrenia for people who have a medical condition where their brain chemistry is out of whack. But there's a difference between being sad and being clinically depressed. Clinical depression is when your brain chemistry isn't working right. Sad is when you're not getting what you want. And too frequently, we try to deal with the mental suffering by fixing it with a pill, or we self-medicate with sugar, etc. So here what Hemaleka is saying is, if the problem is not an imbalance of the humors, meaning physical illness, medicine isn't going to touch it. Any thoughts on this before we go on? Next one.
इति श्रुत्वा हेमलेखां प्राह राजसुतस्ततः प्रिये शृणु प्रवक्ष्यामि यन्मे शोकस्य कारणम्. Thus having heard Hemalekha, the prince said thereafter, "Here, my dear, I shall tell you what is the cause of my sorrow."
So he's at least being straight up and honest with her. Going on.
Paduktya yatpura me bhut sukhadam tad datham nanu na pashyamya dhuna kinchid api me sukhavardhanam. By your speech, that which was giving pleasure to me before has indeed been destroyed. Now I do not see anything at all which would increase my happiness.
So he has this understanding of the vanity, the emptiness of the world of name and form, how everything is impermanent, how the object of desire is nothing more than his imagination. He's thoroughly understood what she said, so he can no longer enjoy the world. You can't fool him anymore. But that's only half the problem here. Going on.
Ragya vitirno vishaya sukhadopi samantatah padhyam na sukhayed yatvat tatha tasmana me sukham. Even though the objects of enjoyment given by the king are pleasure giving all around, they cannot please one sentenced to be killed. So also there is no happiness for me on account of such objects.
So, for a person who's got a death sentence, winning the lottery doesn't do you much good. Here he's saying that understanding what's really going on hasn't really helped. All it's done is make the world taste like ashes. Now, this is a very important point because many people, as they study Vedanta, they're able to let go of many of their desires. But the end result is a feeling of almost like a nihilistic state. You know, why do anything? It's all empty. And there's a key here. There's a key here. Let's go to second chapter of Gita, verse 55. One of my favorites. In 54, Arjuna says, what are the marks of the person of steady wisdom, the Sthita Prajna Purusha? How do they walk? How do they talk? How do they act? How do they sit, etc.? And this starts this very famous section, the Sthita Prajna Purusha section, the last 17 verses after that of the second chapter. And many times, especially in Gita, when a topic is first introduced, the totality of the teaching comes first, and then they break it down. So in verse 55, Krishna says, when a man casts off all the desires of the mind, O Partha, and is satisfied in the self, by the self, then he's said to be a man of steady wisdom. Here we can say person of steady wisdom. Actually, a better translation. So, Hemachyuta has the first half of that shloka. He's cast off all the desires of the mind. But what he doesn't have is the capacity to be satisfied in the self by the self. Which leaves you with nothing but a world that is meaningless and pointless. Any thoughts on this? Next verse.
विषयान् सेवमानोऽहं सदा विष्टिगृहीतवत् तत्पृच्छामि प्रिये ब्रूहि किं कृत्वा सुखमेयहम्. Dear, I ask you to tell me that doing which I shall attain happiness, I who am always pursuing objects of the sense like one held for forced labor.
So, just like a person who's enslaved or sent out on the work gang, if you're a prisoner, where you must work, he is compelled into obligatory action, always, kartavya. And he sees it as forced labor. I have to go buy stuff. I'm shopping again. I have to go indulge in the sex. I have to go buy the cars or the houses. How do I get rid of it? How do I stop? Great, great question. One of the things I love about this scripture is it so clearly illuminates the reality of the human condition. It's not all airy-fairy woo-woo. Our fellow Hemachyuta is a spiritual everyman, a spiritual every person. He goes through the same kind of stuff that you and I do. What's the solution? Going on, next verse.
एवं तेन समापृष्टा हेमलेखा तदा ब्रवीत् ननु मेष सुनिर्वेदम् आगतो मद्वच श्रुतेः. Thus asked by him, Hemalekha said to him then, thinking as follows: Certainly this one has arrived at complete indifference to worldly objects from hearing my words.
So now she says he is getting to be more mature in his vairagya. In the beginning, it was just immature, where he was indulging and hiding and full of shame and stuff like that. Now it's mature enough that he's willing to admit it, and he's talking with his teacher about it. Help me out. He has the indifference. Now let's see. So he's ripening as a student. Let's see what she says. Going on.
Asti bijam shreyasosmin yad evam asti bijam shreyaso yad evam vidho bhavan yeshu shreyo hyasa sambhavyam ta evam vakyagum fanai nahana vapi visheshena vishiyante kadachana. The source of supreme good is here, since you are disgusted with enjoyments in this manner. In whom attainment of supreme good is impossible, they never surpass others even a little through this characteristic difference That is the good composition of words in this manner.
So, what he's been able to do is develop this vairagya, which is a precondition to successful sadhana. So many people will spend their evenings reading Vedanta scriptures while they down a bottle of scotch, go out, indulge in the world, or a complete desire of desires, and they have what I call the Vedanta logic loop. None of this matters because it's all just an illusion. And what these people do is rationalize their suffering. So how does Shankara frame it? In Viveka Chudamani, he talks about how success in spiritual matters is entirely due to the degree of qualifications of a fit student, being adhikari. The first is Viveka, that firm conviction in the intellect that Brahman alone is real and the phenomenal world is unreal. Brahma Satyam Jagam Mithya. That's known as discrimination between the real and the unreal. So it doesn't mean necessarily he's realized it, but he has that firm conviction in the intellect. Hemachuda's got that. Now vairagya, that desire, oh, isn't that interesting? To give up all attachment to enjoyments gained through the senses. And that desire to give up all identification with any form of self, starting from the body up to and including the form of Brahma, the creator, meaning I think I'm a powerful person. So he has developed this mature vairagya, this transcendence of raga, ordinary understanding of passion. So he's ripe to be enlightened. Let's see what happens next. Any questions about this before we go on? So back up a little bit. How do we develop mature vairagya? Through watching the mind. This is the viveka. What does it feel like to want something you don't have? It hurts. There is no other suffering in the mind but wanting something I don't have, or the flip side, wanting to be rid of something I don't like. Dvesha. So we watch our minds, seeing the stupidity of wanting. Its repetitive nature. For what? Just a little bit of juice. It's just crappy economy. 95 cents worth of work for a nickel's worth of pleasure. Then we watch our minds when we satisfy a desire. When desire and object of desire become one, watch your mind. Own your own bliss. See whether or not it's true. When desire and object of desire become one, that feeling, taste of your own self-nature. watch our minds. That's discrimination. So we really clearly see what's going on. Don't believe me. Don't believe the scripture. Prove it or disprove it. The laboratory of your own experience. This is viveka. And it will mature into vairagya. All right, next verse. One more.
Chiram sanradhita hritstha prasanna swatmave devata tripura yena tasyaiva bhaved vanvidhas sthitihi. With whom Tripura, the deity who is one's own self abiding in the heart, worshipped for a long time, is pleased, only for such a person a situation of this kind can happen.
Yes. So here she's saying essentially that a person has developed an indifference to worldly experiences. Mature vairagya. This comes by grace. This comes by grace. All right. What verse are we on, Puneet?
We finished 29. We're going to do 29b next time.
29b next time. All right. So I want to remind everybody that we're going to take our end of year break, our holiday break, going over calendar. So we will not meet next Thursday, the 24th, which is Christmas Eve. We will not meet the following Thursday, which is New Year's Eve, 31st. So we will meet the next time on the 7th of January. All right. Any questions? We have 5 minutes or so to discuss any of the ideas that have arisen in tonight's lesson.
Jim, not a question, but just a comment that, among all the scriptures that I have come across, I think so far this one is the one that speaks the most to our condition. And it's very rich too. I mean, it's a very valuable reading.
I agree. It's one of my favorites. I agree. It was a favorite of Ramana Maharshi's.
I see.
And I was first turned on to it in the late 70s in an edition that was only in the English, and it was also edited. All the sexy parts were taken out. So one of the things that's fun about this one is, first of all, it has the Sanskrit, but also it's complete. It's not edited or abridged anymore. It's very human. That's what I like about it. Any other comments or thoughts? So, going once, going twice, 3 times, we'll sit in meditation then.